Okay, everybody. So, we're here to talk about filtering through the FUD and the FOMO. And before we get started, I'm going to say thank you to everybody for coming out, especially with this cold winter weather that we've been having. And also going to say thank you to Atlas for providing the location for us to meet. Atlas offers some really highly customizable options for space if you're looking for something for yourself or for your company. If you go to the front desk, you can get more details. They'll also offer a free one-day pass. And otherwise, I'm going to let our guests here introduce themselves, and I guess we'll get started.
My name is Mike Monahan. I have been in some way in crypto since the late summer of 2013, just as a Bitcoin buyer. I currently have a company called Crypto Delegate, which is a proof of stake mining operation. So it's different from proof of work where you have a whole bunch of machines buzzing around. Proof of stake is where you have to prove that you own a certain amount. In the case of the system that I have, it's delegated proof of stake. So other people who don't want to do the work can delegate to me, and I do all the work, and then we share in the rewards. I also am working on a project that is doing fractional asset ownership on the blockchain. So you've heard some things like fractional asset on real estate, artwork, basically durable goods that people may want to invest in, but only invest in partially. And I also do some blockchain advising, local stablecoin here in Seattle, things of that nature.
Great to be here. Scott Lewis is my name. I am a co-founder and COO for a company called Redpen. And most of my career background has actually been in the nonprofit sector. And in the past 15 years in the roles of Chief Operating Officer, Chief Development Officer, done a lot of fundraising in global development in areas of human trafficking, forced bonded labor, slavery, secure land rights for the extreme poor in all outside of the United States. So got into technology actually through my son about 3 years ago through this vision that he had through his own experiences. And in the midst of putting together a development team, I was asked to come in and give leadership to that team as a interim CEO, and have been involved in it ever since. I haven't had a ton of cryptocurrency background or blockchain or technology backgrounds, other than for us as a company in the past 14 months or so, through a lot of advisors and legal team, we're encouraged to go after doing an ICO, which we pursued hard, and we were just on the brink of launching a year ago. And right when the SEC made some significant decisions around Munchie. And so we, like many others, decided to pause and backpedal a little bit and kind of go, okay, let's regroup. And just went through the process of, is this still a good idea? Retooled at the beginning of last year for a few months, and then chose to go after an ICO again, but doing it outside of the United States and in select markets. And that has been, again, a continued journey. We were excited about the first amount of funding to potentially come in early July, which was going to be great. Right when the market took that next tank, and they chose to back up and say, when we bounce back, we're still very excited to jump in with you. But we are still pursuing that. Our CEO is in Hong Kong, meeting with 10 family wealth offices just before Thanksgiving. Continue to have a lot of different conversations, but the conversations have come back towards equity deals, and I think stable coins were, wanting tokens, but some equity in the company as well. So encouraged by those things, but I tell you, it has been interesting. So there's a little of my background.
Cool, thanks. Hey guys, my name is Nate Whitehill. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Crypto Slate. Crypto Slate is a cryptocurrency blockchain news website. We also have a huge company database, product database, cryptocurrency coin profiles for over 2,000 cryptocurrencies. We've been in operation now for over a year. We've published around 1,800 original news articles and analysis articles about the cryptocurrency market. whether it's about particular coin projects or even cryptocurrency startups local to Seattle, Malta, Korea. We have a global team of distributed writers. And I'd actually just got back from Malta, so it's really interesting to see the difference in the scene between here in Seattle and overseas. But yeah, I'm looking forward to chatting with everyone.
Okay, so why don't we start off with sort of a first question to consider, which is, in terms of the big problem when it comes to getting information, what's a bigger problem for each of you? Is it discovery? Is it information overload? Or is it misinformation, and why?
I'll say it's a little bit of all of them. I would say that there's a lot of misinformation, first off, just because anytime that you have a technology that people don't fundamentally understand, there's a handful of people that really understand it, but a vast majority of people who are in it for the money, they don't really understand it, they don't really care. So whenever you have that combination of a lot of money and an unknown technology, you're gonna have a lot of people who are just gonna try to convince you of something just to buy their token. And so you'll have various different blogs, websites, chats, Reddits, all going on talking about how this is the next new thing, but yet it's hard to know what that thing actually does. Is this just a currency? Is it a platform for developers? Is it a platform that enables some other service maybe in the future? There's a lot of ways that you can segment this market into groups that actually start to make sense if you are willing to go through the time. And then there's ones that are just outright scams, ones that have Ryan Gosling as the CEO. And I think there was one that had the same guy with 4 different hairdos as the CEO, COO, chief marketing. And yet, during the craze, they got millions and millions of dollars. So how do you, and then for a time, they actually made people a lot of money too because of the FOMO. So I think that right now, you need to do your own research. That's the real key. You need to do so much research that you yourself feel comfortable that the information that you personally have found satisfies your requirement to take the next step, whether that's investing, whether that's getting involved with a project. Because if you take somebody else's word for it, there's going to be 100 people who are going to be willing to take advantage of you and convince you of something that you shouldn't be doing. So number one, do your own research until you personally feel comfortable that you know that you're willing to take that risk.
I think, because I've thought about the whole discover and the volume of information that go a bit hand in hand. And I would even break out the discover part from the stumbling and the search, where you're just opening up your feeds and whatever's going on, you're kind of bumping into, and that takes you down a particular road. Versus intentionally trying to find something out and trying to be satisfied with that. I didn't talk a lot about what we are attempting to do with the Red Pen, which is to be able to provide a new and better way to be able to discover, understand, and engage with news, stories, and events that are going on in the world. That, as Mitchell and I were chatting about earlier, the current, all of the smart news and Flipboards and BuzzFeed, I mean, all those different things, every one take you back to a single source article. And oftentimes, based upon our behavior, take you back to the kind of articles that are going to continue to feed you where you want to be fed in our own echo chambers. And don't go out and do the hard work of going out in all these different places. What are the different thoughts, the different opinions from different biases, which are all there within different news outlets, bloggers, social media, and bring those into one place. And that's what we're wanting to do, to be able to have a greater confidence that I'm getting a bigger picture, not one without bias, but one that almost celebrates bias, that there are different viewpoints. And I know I've probably lived a little bit longer than most of you in the room. All of the things that I thought were super true earlier in life. And as you get kicked out of your own comfortable cul-de-sac, you recognize that they're just not. And you begin to see that there are different impacts and different things around the world that should shape our thinking. And I think that's one of the things in regards to between this whole world of how do we discover what is important to us, and how do we embrace the different kind of vantage points in that.
So as someone who's been living and breathing crypto media every day for the past 3.5 years, and now in charge of producing it for the past year, I can safely tell you there's a lot of bullshit in the crypto media world. There's just a lot of sites which do not disclose their interests. Unfortunately, I feel like it's the rarity where a website is actually telling you if the author is invested in the asset he or she has been writing about. But that's one of our big tenets, is to be as objective and transparent as possible. So if, for example, a writer writes an article about Bitcoin, they're required to have a commitment to transparency that they own this asset if they're writing about that. That's something that a lot of sites, even big sites like Cointelegraph, you don't see that very often. So it's extremely important to just be aware of who is writing an article, what's their background, are they disclosing if they're holding any of that asset, and then to look for that disclosure at the end of the post. That's something that's super key.
So the subject of misinformation has been brought up by more than one of you already. And you know, we're here to talk about it in the context of crypto. And with what's happened, say, in this last year with the ICO frenzy, and just generally this atmosphere within crypto, has it, you know, is it harder to get accurate, useful information as compared to, say, just high tech or finance? Like, you know, say you're following Amazon and Walmart stocks, and you know they're battling it out over possibly buying Flipkart in India. You know, how do you really find out what's going to happen and how it's going to, you know, impact things? Is that somehow not as hard as it is in crypto and blockchain to get accurate information?
I'm not quite sure that you can ever really know that the information you're getting is accurate until after it's already happened. So there's so many sites out there that will predict that this is the next cool thing, and people will debate on Reddit, but who knows? I mean, these could be the two people arguing on Reddit could be the same person just to build up a frenzy. And that's where you get so many of these projects that promise you the world. They promise that they're going to, you know, purify water and cure cancer all in the blockchain. And it sounds great, and people want to believe. That's the FOMO. They don't understand it, but their fear of missing out, and that's a problem. So I think that oftentimes you have to ask yourself, first you have to know, what fundamentally does the blockchain do? What is crypto? Why would you ever really need it? And once you can start to kind of embrace that concept, what projects are actually valid? You know, you can say, well, we want to put music streaming on the blockchain. Well, it sounds cool, but why? Are you going to be able to have no less than a 10x benefit than the current streaming system? And I would argue probably not for a long time. Blockchain's not exactly efficient like that. But you get a lot of these projects that will raise millions and millions of dollars based on, we're going to take fill in the blank, and we're going to put it on the blockchain, give us $10 million, and then in the short run, it'll do a 10x return. Well, the problem is that 99% of these use cases are ridiculous. The other 1% that actually may work, only 1 out of 10 is actually going to make it work. And that's where I said before, do your own research. If you understand truly what blockchain is meant to be and really what kind of use cases may be useful, then you can start to filter. And then you start filtering people. You start looking at their LinkedIns. You start seeing, are these real teams? Are they backed by real investment companies, real VCs, real investors? And there's no substitute for doing your own research and then feeling comfortable that you personally have done that legwork. As it comes to, is there any such thing as real information? You only know after the fact. On a lot of situations, you only know after they've either made it big.
So that's not unique to crypto then.
Well, but the thing is that if you're doing Amazon, things like that, they have highly regulated rules that say what they're allowed to announce, what they're not allowed to announce. If they say something inaccurate that was to pump their stock, people go to jail, presumably. And so is that a case for regulation? I guess you could make a case, but the case for blockchain is the lack of regulation. It's saying, how do we create a world where, yes, there's fraud, but sooner or later it all starts to work itself out to the point where the systems become stable because of a simple supply and demand economics. We haven't yet seen that. That's why you see so much volatility. So, well, I'll pass it on.
Just speaking from my experience in the question in regards to has the frenzy around ICOs and cryptocurrency made it more difficult to get accurate information, et cetera. You take ourselves back a year or even back to this, to certainly 2016, early 2017, when the frenzy was just, the FOMO was, off the charts. People are going to miss out. The conferences that I went to, it was pink suits, unbuttoned shirts, and a Lambo for you, and a Lambo for you, and a Lambo for you. And it was just like, okay, where is something that's real in here? And whatever the problem was, the answer was blockchain. Just as you were describing, versus here is this new technology that is amazing, and it can be amazing as it supplements other technologies that are already doing their thing. And where do you appropriately utilize that? I think for me, and most of the conversations that I was having was with VCs, family wealth offices, individuals looking for the seed funding that is going to get us, to the next steps. And probably one of the bigger challenges was being able to differentiate or educate myself, and then educate people around the difference between cryptocurrency and blockchain. And fortunately, in the past 6 months or so, there have been a lot of people much smarter than I who have put together the great infographics, and even the Goldmans and others who would come out and be able to differentiate that. So the general public that was just swept up in, I don't want to miss out on not owning a Bitcoin, can have greater, just information and understanding in regards to the difference between the cryptocurrency world and what actually blockchain does.
Earlier, Scott, too, you said that knowing the original source for any given information that you read is super key. And I think that's something that anytime you read anything in the crypto media space, you should look for where is the actual source that came from. If you're not finding that, then someone could literally just make up information. And unfortunately, there's many sites which do try to make predictions that say Tron is going to be, $1 by a certain date, or XRP is going to hit $589. I've read the case for that. And a lot of times people try to create the facts, but being able to go to a verified source for anything, whether it's an actual chart on a site like CoinMarketCap, or wherever like the original press release was, that's what becomes key to differentiate what you're reading or not is just complete bullshit.
So with crypto, then theoretically, it might be a little harder, lack of regulation and lack of what you could call sources of verified truth, or sort of known and respected sources of information. Although you could argue maybe Crypto Slate might be changing that, as well as
that's definitely the goal. That's the goal.
And so that leads to another question that we can talk about, which is, in general, all of us here in the room, and as well as people just generally interested in crypto, they're getting their information from media like Crypto Slate, like Cointelegraph or CoinDesk. Is there an incentives problem in crypto media? You have, say, a company or a publication like CoinDesk that when the market is doing well and people are excited about investing, they go to the events that CoinDesk puts on and pay a lot of money. Therefore, it's in CoinDesk's best interest, theoretically, to get people excited about the possibilities of investing in crypto and blockchain. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so really, there is an incentives problem, absolutely. It totally depends on what are the other business models of the website that you're reading, or what parties control that. So for example, Digital Currency Group, which many of you may know of, it's owned by a guy named Barry Schilbert, who's one of the early Bitcoin investment pioneers. So Digital Currency Group owns part of CoinDesk. They bought CoinDesk back in 2012 or so for about $500,000. And they also own a ton of other different media and other companies in the crypto or blockchain space. So knowing what is the tangled web of interests, especially controlling interests for any given site, like Crypto Slate, we're entirely independent. We're not owned by any other cryptocurrency or blockchain parent group, but there are many sites that do have a whole tangled web, as I mentioned, of different things that they control, whether it's events. And earlier, as you mentioned, Yossi, sorry guys, by being able to just understand what really is the interest. If the crypto market is high and everyone's saying buy Bitcoin, that may be because they're trying to do a big event or something like that. So.
You two are the experts in this world, way more than me. I think an observation that I've had just in several people I'm just following on Twitter and all is, and you all may understand all those charts with the B wave and the
technical analysis,
the technical
yes.
analysis things. And I'm reading, it's like, boy, if this if
Dead
this
cow bounce.
yeah, if this goes to here, then Bitcoin is going to be going to da 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 da, and it's just all the incentives in regards to their the digital marketing that they want to do and all that kind of thing. When you're right next to it, you're reading an article that is costing $3,500 to $4,500 to mine a Bitcoin, and it's now at $3,600. You're going, obviously they're incentivized by something, money, of course. So that's, I think that lends to a little bit of the chaos and the confusion out there for people who aren't doing the deep dive every day, probably.
Yeah, and one other thing I'll mention is that I think that short-term predictions are very unhealthy for the market. So anytime you see someone say that Bitcoin is going to be $30,000 by any given date, that really is misleading a lot of people to basically put more money into Bitcoin thinking that it'll be that, and then when it's not, obviously it's leaving that that entity or person holding the bag. So it's very important that if you do read predictions, that they're predictions that are 5 to 10 years out, not predictions that are 3 to 6 months or a year out. That's very irresponsible.
So what about Tim Draper in 2022? He's predicting $250,000 as the price of Bitcoin.
Or John McAfee saying that if it's not $1 million by 2020, he'll eat his own dick on national television. Like that's just absurd. And I think a lot of people, once they read that, they were like, "How can we take this guy seriously?" Yeah. Because he's basically kind of turned himself into a little bit of a fool by making such bold predictions. So yeah, I'm personally not a fan. I don't like that. I mean, it makes good headlines and good media. People get excited about it. Probably gets people interested in the space, but it's not healthy at all for the ecosystem.
I'd like to see a lot of these people who have a lot of power and influence. I mean, McAfee obviously has a lot of influence. He's kind of he's a character for sure. But Tim Draper has a lot more legitimate influence. Like he's a legitimate billionaire businessman. I would like him to stand up more and say, and he does sometimes, instead of saying, "Here's my price prediction," say, "Here's my technology prediction. Here's what it actually does. Here's why we need Bitcoin blockchain. Here are some use cases." I met his son at an event this past summer. And that's actually something that he's very good at, Adam Draper, right? Where he actually says, well, here are actually some use cases for blockchain. Here's some use cases for this new technology. And these are the ones I'm investing in. Yes, will the price go up? Sure, because of people refining these use cases, starting to use them, but I'm not willing to make that type of prediction. And also, it's the same people who own a lot of these tokens who make these same predictions, by the way. And there's a major conflict there when someone who owns, I mean, Tim Draper himself bought from the Silk Road thing, what, 250,000 from the government way back in, I think, 2014. And so he's got an incentive to say, oh, it's going to be $250,000, because even if it comes up 1/10 of that, he makes, an extra $1 billion. So yeah, so I would just say that right there is what causes FOMO, is when people with reputation convince you that something is going to go up in value, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that only will end up in a spike and a bust. And it's not going to be the very wealthy people who are going to lose. It's going to be the people who got in at a high price and sold at a low price. They're the ones who are paying from their paychecks to fuel this whole thing.
So we've been talking about crypto media, but what about other media? So you've got analysts like Thomas Lee from Fundstrat going on CNBC making these kinds of predictions that we're all agreeing aren't necessarily helpful. You've got Google and Facebook banning advertising for crypto. Are measures like these helping or hurting?
I think that it's a little bit of both. I think that private organizations who want to ban because it's going to hurt their own reputation is fully within their right. I probably would have made the same decision if I were Facebook, because there's a point where it's absolutely obvious that there's a lot of scams. And when you're the platform that allows it, it's just going to feed back on you. So I think Facebook and Google are saving their own reputation. They're not actually trying necessarily to help people. They say they are, but really they're helping their own reputation. So when a bunch of people get scammed, they don't go to Google and say your reputation is now taking a hit. Facebook, you're now less credible. When it comes to the news organizations, they have even less clue about what this whole blockchain thing is. Anyone, MSNBC, CNN, Fox, all these guys, they're scrambling to find anyone with even a half bit of legitimacy and knowledge to come on their news program and educate their viewers on this newfangled technology. And so they don't necessarily do a whole lot of research. I remember there's a YouTube guy, Dave Rubin. He had Roger Ver. Do you see that?
I don't think I saw that one.
A lot of people, Roger Ver is definitely a character in this scene, but he was pitched up as the all-knowing guy of Bitcoin for this presentation. And there's a lot of feedback later on, like that was not the right guy to choose. So people need to do their research not on what they're reading, but who actually they are putting on the platform to represent a legitimate news source, because there aren't a whole lot of them. Even someone like Tim Draper, who I actually think is a relatively good source, sometimes causes FOMO through his predictions.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can't think of really a lot of completely neutral, non-biased, knowledgeable news sources out there. They're like a single entity. I mean,
I would say the Wall Street Journal probably has some of the best coverage that's not completely biased. Like CNBC is probably one of the worst offenders. When Ripple was $3 last December, they had a video that was Brian Kelly, who owns a crypto fund, saying, here's how you can buy Ripple, and taking you all through the steps when it was at the peak. And then, funnily enough, after it dropped, he was having a video, here's how to sell Ripple when it's at $1. Like their interests are not our interests.
I think that's a very good one. Their interests are not our interests. I think that summarizes it very well.
So, this leads to another question, which is, and this might speak to also Scott's product. How can media help with this problem?
I think one comment just in regards to kind of the Facebook, Google question is, did they do the right thing or the wrong thing? It seems like it was a missed opportunity for them to demonstrate responsibility in the midst of getting so much heat for things that they're being irresponsible in, that rather than just dump it, it seems like they've got a lot of smart men and women who work there to be able to think creatively around how can we use this as an example to do what is right, and to use the kind of influence, the kind of power that we have to do that. I'm not a fan of Facebook right now. We've just had an incident. This is a little bit of a sidetrack, but my wife is a long-term survivor living with AIDS. And so she was writing a post on World AIDS Day, 30th anniversary of World AIDS Day. And the theme for the 30th anniversary is Know Your Status. So she wrote a letter in regards to her own experience of not knowing her status for a number of years. And she posted it and they took it down because it hit some sort of, she's not a political activist or an AIDS activist or anything like that, but it's less powerful when they say you can, we'll review it and put it back up in a couple of days. Less powerful or influential on December 3rd versus December 1st. So it's just like, it seems you're better than that. So, but to your question in regards to, what is out there that can help in regards to
and how
yeah, I think again for what we are wanting to do with Red Pen is, and it addresses a little bit of what you were just chatting about a little bit earlier, Nate, is not only being able to bring in a consolidated or a summary of article around one particular event and being able to get all the different vantage points of what that is one of the things that we are also working on, is just attributing reputation to content providers, authors within the social media, that even before you read the article, you would be able to say, here is the content provider. What are their biases? What is their reputation? Here is this person who might have a reputation of being a trash talker. Although they have a big following, they actually are critical on 67% of the things that they write on. But to be able to have some of that upfront knowledge of who that is, one of the things that popped out to me a number of months ago when, I mean, the fake news was just like rampant. And I'm reading an article, it's like, this just doesn't seem right. And then you find the source that it's some news agency misspelled out of Moldova. And it's like, I just spent 4 minutes reading this thing, which is 80% crap and enough that kept me reading. Yeah, the clickbait. And everybody loves a good clickbait. And it takes so long to get to picture number 22. That is, really that cool, space shot or whatever. But the whole sense of having reputation and having that upfront, that would help you be able to just navigate your way through things.
So helping people actually be able to rate the source of the information that they're getting.
Yeah, for sure. One thing too that I think that crypto media especially can do to help is to call out other crypto media. And there's one example which I thought was great. So we have a competitor. I'm a fan of this other site. It's called Breaker Mag. They're owned by Singular DTV, which is a cryptocurrency project out of LA. But they did some great investigative research where they emailed many of the other top crypto news websites, and they asked them, how much can we pay to have an advertisement on your site, but remove the disclosure? And then they compiled that into a list of basically how many of the other crypto media sites that you may read every day are basically just completely full of shit and will break really what are the FTC guidelines. And I think that is one interesting thing about crypto media in the US versus outside of the US, is crypto media outside of the US is much more willing to get rid of disclosure because they don't have the FTC breathing down their neck. But anytime someone is paid to write about anything online, they're supposed to say that. They're supposed to say how much it was paid for and by whom. But this other site, as I mentioned, did an unbelievable job at really showing all the other crypto media websites which were willing to basically be bribed to lie to their readers.
So we've been talking about, how the media can be helpful in this area. And, we've also talked about getting information from the media. How do each of you get your information, personally? And what have you found to be the most effective ways to get that information?
Crypto Twitter.
Crypto Twitter.
Strangely enough, that actually is it's a tough sea to swim through, but there's a lot of sharks in there. But you do get a lot of information from crypto Twitter. But you have to be really skeptical and really cynical about all the information, so you can start to kind of filter it in your mind, because there's 99.9% junk out there. And there's little gold nuggets every once in a while. I would say that websites like yours are credible.
Thank you.
I would say that the thing is that you also get linked to it on Twitter. So I find myself going there oftentimes through Twitter. But I don't know if I have a great answer. The fact is that everywhere you go, there's going to be a tremendous amount of garbage. And you just need to first be aware that it is garbage to the point where you just start to recognize it, where you start to be skeptical of every line you read. Whose incentive is it to say that? And am I going to believe it? And then I always go back to what I said 10 minutes ago is, do you understand what the fundamental use cases of blockchain are, the fundamental reasons why cryptocurrency exists? And then can you project in your mind 10, 15, 20 years in the future as to what would a world look like with these technologies out there? And then what kind of companies would be alive at that time? And if you can start to do that and say, well, I believe that there is a space for decentralized sharing of information. There is a place for getting, not utilizing banks. There is a case to be used for digital scarcity. And then you start seeing companies that believe in the cause, not just believe in the ICO pump and dump dream. Then you can start to piece together in your own mind the stories that make sense for your own view of how the future will hopefully operate.
So it's developing your own personal framework.
Yeah.
For making sense of things. That that's what
That's what I
seems
do.
to work for you, Mike.
Yeah. I try to project into the future as to what will this technology actually be used for in 10 or 20, 30 years, and then work backwards from that as to who in the world right now is actually trying to solve those use cases in a legitimate way. And then those are the ones I pay attention to more.
Scott.
I would agree. It's difficult. And I think the next step of that has been for us, again, in the midst of the ICO world that we have been working to pull off, is the people or the companies who are approaching us to be our partners in doing that. And they've got connections with all the different investors, and the amount of due diligence and the number of people who it took several conversations to be able to just finally land on just that they're just crap, and they just were not legitimate, which is reflective of what I've heard you both saying in regards to the not only the communication out there, but oftentimes the sources of those communications. It just is a lot of work, and for somebody I've been in some pretty great space throughout my career within this NGO nonprofit, trying to do some good in the world type of a world. So coming in with eyes kind of like, hey, this is awesome. And then all of a sudden discovering there's a fairly good amount of bad actors that you just have to be really careful about.
So we're lucky in the sense that because we've been around about a year now, we have a lot of direct contacts at some of the biggest exchanges and biggest projects. We oftentimes get news directly from the source before it breaks, and then we have an embargo. So for example, Binance had some news last night about their new decentralized exchange, and we knew about that about a week ago. We were just waiting for Binance to give us okay that we could publish that information. So that's one big source for us, is just directly from the horse's mouth. Crypto Twitter, as you mentioned too, is a great source for information, just because you can get, you can see exactly what Craig Wright, who I consider to be one of the four dark horsemen of the crypto space, really do believe about Bitcoin SV and why it's better than Bitcoin ABC. So being able to embed those tweets directly into our articles, that's another thing that we've taken a lot of pride in, is that anytime we say anything, we want to be able to have the source right there, whether you can click on it or see the actual tweet that someone said. Having that directly embedded in the article that you're reading, that obviously makes it a lot easier for the reader to verify whether what we're saying is correct or where the information is coming from in the first place.
So it's not only personal relationships, which a lot of us might not be able to access, but citations.
Absolutely, yeah.
We have about 20 minutes left. So at this point, if people want to start asking questions, feel free to raise hands. There's still some questions to go over, but I thought I saw in the audience somebody wanted to raise a hand. Oh, okay. Yeah.
So you mentioned it's very difficult to get an unbiased source or a person. Are there any people that you would say are getting close to that you respect and can follow? To any one of you.
Unbiased people. It's so hard to say. Like, I think honestly, everyone will always have a bias. I mean, even someone like Nouriel Roubini, who many of you may know as the professor from NYU, who basically says, he's the most anti-Bitcoin person that probably exists in the space right now. He thinks it's all a scam. He thinks, he made a good prediction, obviously, back in 2008 or prior to 2008, that the economy was going to tank. And because of that, he now considers everything else that he says as gospel. So there's been a huge war between him and many of the Bitcoiners and people in cryptocurrency. But yeah, I don't think there is someone without a bias.
Yeah, quick question. What about the communities? Are they? Oh. What about the communities? Aren't they like a credible source, provided that like you said, you have to be aware of what blockchain is and what it's for?
So I would say that communities are both credible and highly biased. The whole reason why they're in that community is that they have an epic bias for that product. So like the community that I'm heavily involved in, Well, I mean, the reason why they're there is because they are incredibly biased. I'm biased. And so there is this echo chamber mentality as to why we are the best. Imagine going to, the local sports bar, that's the Seahawks sports bar. They're going to tell you why they're the absolute best. And then the Raiders bar is going to say why they're the absolute best. So community is a great place to find out maybe information about a given project, but it's definitely not the source of unbiased information. But if you know that, then you can, again, knowing about the bias, knowing that there's at least that the bias is there, helps you to start to filter through the absolute trash to the 2% of real information that's in it. And then when you start to do that, you start to get tricked less on the FOMO, because it's the 98% of the people who are saying a lot of garbage that are ginning up this FOMO, and that's what is driving prices up and down very quickly. So I think the other thing too is that, are you in this for the long road, or are you in this for the short road? Are you in it for just the quick gain, or are you in it because you really think this technology will change the world in some meaningful way? If you believe in the latter, then the dips are less concerning. They hurt. I mean, let's be realistic. They hurt. Right now, it sucks. But if you really truly believe that this is a technology that will be somewhere put on the mantle next to the internet and next to mobile technology, then the fear of the long term is diminished considerably, because you see it 10 years out, not just 10 days out.
Given that it's difficult for the average person and even people in the space to sort through all of this misinformation, how well do you think that the government understands blockchain?
Mm-hmm. Very poorly. I mean, they haven't been able to draft any legislation yet, obviously, while you have other jurisdictions that are drafting very pro-blockchain legislation. So the SEC has basically been regulating by enforcement, which has been detrimental to the blockchain ecosystem here in the United States. It's much more difficult to operate a blockchain-based business if you're doing a token, for example, here than it is Malta. It seems like companies here are spending tens of thousands of dollars a month in legal fees, while overseas they're spending that on development. So it's kind of putting the United States at a disadvantage. There was a great Vice News episode on blockchain a few months ago that had Vitalik Buterin going through Russia and meeting with many of the Russian heads of state, and the Vice News crews following him. And they asked the financial minister of Tatarstan, they were like, what is going to happen to countries that don't choose to embrace blockchain technology? And he basically said, well, in 20 to 30 years, they will be in the Stone Age. And I'm personally, that's kind of how I see the United States' path right now, until the government does understand blockchain technology much better and understand why that they actually need to create legislation and rules that will foster innovation as opposed to threaten it. We're going to constantly be behind the curve.
I would say I'm a little less dire on that one. I think that everything is true in that case. But one thing you have to remember is that the U.S. is at the front of the line when it comes to setting a standard for the world. If the U.S. sets a rule that they don't fully understand, and they don't understand all the consequences of it, has a massive ripple effect to the entire planet. If Malta does something and they screw up, let's be realistic, who cares? It's Malta. So I think that it is legitimate. I've spoken to a couple of regulators and many lawyers that are in touch with a lot of U.S. regulators, and they want to know. They truly want to know. They just don't want to make any decisions that they're going to have to step back on later because they made a poor decision. And that could have literally trillions of dollars of impact of mistakes if they do something wrong. When another country, it doesn't really matter. Now, when it comes to will the U.S. miss out? Maybe. But don't forget, we're also developing a decentralized technology. I'm not 100% convinced that just because you launched it in Malta, that it really matters in 10 years from now. It's going to be decentralized. It's not all the cash isn't just going to flow to Malta and Malta is going to turn into the next superpower. They still have to launch these products, these services in countries that will actually pay for them, and that's the US. So they're going to have to follow US rules whether they like it or not, because the US marketplace is where they want to make their money sooner or later. So I think that ultimately the US is still one of the best countries for safety, for innovation, for an actual marketplace of people who want to buy this technology. And so I think that I would like to see them move faster, but I don't think it's as dire that it's going to be left in the Stone Age. Obviously, if Malta's not going to have spaceships tomorrow, and we're going to be chiseling stones to make fire. So I think ultimately, I would rather have a legal entity that is a little bit slower to make rules and allow people to kind of stumble and make some mistakes and then forgive later as opposed to ask for permission. I think that's what the SEC is currently doing. They're saying, look, we may not know fraud, or we may not be able to identify it, but we know when we see it type of mentality. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not as bad as China. You know, I kind of see it as in the middle between something where it's absolutely banning crypto and blockchain technology versus actually trying to do, like, for example, in Russia, they have government-sponsored blockchain hackathons. So consider that.
Yeah.
Food for thought.
There is okay. There is a group of people that believe that the blockchain can solve all of the issues with misinformation in the media. And they believe that there are multiple ways, even projects that are currently going on. Do you think that a blockchain really can do that?
I think blockchain has a place in that. That the immutable nature of blockchain being able to track and verify is a and I'm not a technical person, so there's going to be other people with a lot better answer than me. But I think it has a place not only in the media and being able to capture accuracy and be able to retain that, but my understanding is it's going to be complemented by a lot of other technologies as well. And I think that it is going to lend itself towards better behavior and accountability on the part of humans.
There were a few ICOs last year that are trying to do that. Like if you Google decentralized news network, DNN, they actually ran an ICO. They're trying to figure out how they can store facts and sources on the blockchain. So I know that would be potentially a great use case. I think ultimately the thing is what's going to get adoption? You know, will some sort of decentralized news network get adoption, and people are now using their native tokens in order to read the stories or have trust that what they're reading has been fully verified through a system.
So regarding the verification of the news, of course, the idea is that the majority is going to somehow weed out the misinformation or the news that are not truth. At the same time, it would depend very much who is going to that particular media source. For example, if we have a media source where just certain type of people are going there, let me give you a specific example. Let's say there is a very conservative news media or a source. They put something that is not right, but everybody who goes there is part of the same group of people. Of course, they will validate it right away, and it will become a validated news on the blockchain. So I'm curious if there are ways that we can really have something that is a better way to validate news.
Yeah, so how can we use blockchain to kind of get rid of echo chambers as well? Or yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I think ultimately for any decentralized news source, as I mentioned, that is able to get some sort of adoption and become a go-to source, people have to decide at the time, is this a conservative source? Is this a liberal source? Is it truly a neutral source? That's something that I think we'll have to look at a case-by-case basis.
One thing, I'm going to say that I actually don't, I'm going to go to the other side of this one and say that I don't think that this is a use case for blockchain. We have to understand what is the purpose of blockchain. The blockchain, in this context, it literally just says that the data never got manipulated, that the data is the same data as it was when it first got put in there. So when it comes to news, information, all that type of stuff, it's not that the concern is, well, let's just say, if it's garbage in, it's garbage out. And whether it's immutable garbage, it's still garbage. And so just because you take a bunch of information and you put it on the blockchain, all it does is validate that information never changed. It didn't validate that information as true, accurate, unbiased, or whatever. And I think that this is where it goes back to people trying to solve problems and thinking that the universal answer is blockchain. I would actually say that it's probably the other way around, where blockchain removes, it creates anonymity, it creates a trustless environment. And when it comes to news, you actually want a trusted environment. You want to know that the people who are speaking to you right now, their reputation is on the line, and it's in their best interest to at least tell you something mostly accurate, or else they'll be fired, or their reputation will be such that nobody will want to watch them anymore. Blockchain is almost the exact opposite. It creates a trustless environment where anyone can post anything for any reason. It's immutable forever, but doesn't mean that's at all accurate.
Well, do you think storing reputation on the blockchain is a use case?
Only in the case in which we know that there's a case of fraud where reputation is being modified. The thing is that if we think that there is a case for reputation, like reputation points, for example, which I think is great, but do we have a case where those points have been tampered with, and somebody has hacked the system and has increased their points 50 points and maybe lowered yours by 50? That would be a case of blockchain. You can't tamper it because it's immutable. But I haven't seen that the reason why we all have fake news issues on both sides is because people are hacking the system trying to increase points on up or down. It's because the fundamental news sources have their bias and either are not divulging those biases, or you just like those biases, so you decide to listen to them more often. Blockchain won't help. It won't solve that. And I think that's why I hate to say it, I wouldn't get involved with a project that says, here's a problem, something, blockchain. You know, South Park episode, you know, under steel underpants, question mark, profit. You know, we don't know what's in the middle, but we know that there's some method in which we do this, and that's going to become logical. And that's where I see blockchain right now. There's just so many problems that can only be solved with a different solution. It's not necessarily blockchain. I think, unfortunately, this is one that I see that people are putting a lot of time and effort into that I don't see a good outcome.
Question.
The last point on that, the reason why your site is legitimate is not because it's on the blockchain, it's because you have built up a reputation to the point where people trust you. And that's why if you put everything on the blockchain, it wouldn't make any difference to your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the things in the very beginning too. We started Crypto Slate when the ICO space was very hot. And we decided we don't want to do a token. We don't want to ever seem like we have a bias to pump our own token, our own ICO. So we stayed away from that and chose to maintain a centralized model for decentralized news.
I look at news like for entertainment, boredom, or anxiety. When I want to invest, I look at the market cap and whether Binance or Bittrex carries it. Beyond that, I own a lot of coins, and I just kind of build my portfolio based on that. I never would go on the news to figure out how to invest money. The news is just for fun. Do you guys also like invest using some other method besides the news, and then still read the news, but just for fun?
So I personally stopped investing really when we started Crypto Slate. One, trying to time and trade the markets is super time consuming. And I just didn't want to put my efforts into trying to make money as a trader anymore. And obviously it then creates a conflict of interest. If I'm writing about a particular project, or I'm not a writer per se, but I manage writers. But if we're writing about a particular project that I just invested in, that's a conflict of interest, and I'm not okay with that. But I think was that your question? Or?
But you don't invest.
Correct, not anymore. Yeah.
So if you guys do invest, and do you invest on things other than the news?
I do not invest. I have invested small amounts just to be able to exercise through how it actually works and how it flows, but I have not gone in heavy.
I do some investing. I tend to go in. I'm a terrible day trader. Let's put it that way. In 2014, I lost my shirt day trading, and so I unplugged all the way through 2015. I work backwards on use case now. I don't care about. I mean, the thing you have to know about Binance and all these exchanges is that a lot of them. I don't know if they still do it, but there's kind of a bribe to list concept where you have to pay a fee to get on these exchanges. And it's not just we have to tweak our systems to make your technology work. A lot of these tokens are ERC20. They can flip the switch tomorrow. It's a legitimate bribery type situation. So just because it's listed on on an exchange doesn't necessarily mean anything more than liquidity. That's quite literally all being listed on an exchange, except for maybe the exception of Coinbase because they are US regulated. So if you get listed on Coinbase, you might be able to argue that there was that they're putting their reputation on. But everyone else, it's just a liquidity thing. I work backwards, and again, I say, what do I truly believe this technology was designed to be? Digital money, avoiding banks, regulators, digital scarcity, immutability, distributed networks where for some reason you want to get around a centralized a company that may be able to control your information. These are all use cases that I think are valid on the blockchain and cryptocurrency. And then I work my way backwards and say, who's tackling that project? Who's actually trying to solve one of these problems? And are they a legitimate team? And then that's how I would decide to invest in them.
But just to clarify real quick about Binance, they recently switched their listing fees to where they're donating the entire proceed to charity. So that obviously is a stark contrast to prior when they were accepting up to $4 million per listing fee for individual coins. And that's not to say that Binance doesn't have shitcoins. There's a lot of shitcoins on Binance, but their interests now are more towards listing things and donating that money to charity than just taking it as profit. Yeah. Yeah, so there's a conflict of interest there, I'm sure, too.
I have a question over here.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you guys for doing this. It's very informative. So I was kind of wondering, it seems that there's this idea that all this FUD and the fake news is a bad thing, which I know for some people it is. And, if you got caught buying at a high point about this time last year, you're probably not happy with the way things turned out. In the finance world with news, like we were talking about before, we typically have a 3-letter agency regulating what you can and can't say. Do you see maybe a flip side to it where it's a good thing that we're having this? Back in early 2000s, it was don't trust anything you read on the internet. If it's not in a published book, it can't be trusted. Nowadays, it's more, maybe don't trust things on Facebook, but there's plenty of trustworthy places on the internet. Do you see this kind of pushing the financial media news world into a different place where it's actually, we don't need these 3-letter agencies saying what you can and can't do? Yes, a lot of people were negatively affected, but maybe it's making us as a consumer of media more informative as opposed to relying on people to try and filter out that information. We don't need these book publishers to tell us what's true and what isn't true. We don't need these government agencies telling us what is true and what isn't true. It's kind of up to us to start to think for ourselves a little bit more. Thoughts?
I think that's definitely that's the goal, and that's kind of idealistic in some sense, because the majority of people that bought in the December 2017 bull run were just retail investors that really were, they didn't have any clue. They just heard from their Uber driver, they should buy Bitcoin, and then they go buy Bitcoin, and they're obviously down a lot since. So that's definitely a bummer. Obviously, the regulatory bodies, they're performing a great service as far as trying to protect the retail investors, trying to protect the small investors. But some of the ways in which they've been regulating by enforcement versus really getting, and I know it's not the SEC's job to get Congress to create legislation, but that would obviously be a more ideal way that we have kind of clear guidelines and rules in place before people start investing in ICOs.
I would say that for the most part, I'd say for the most part that's correct, that the market forces will take care of themselves. But one thing we have to remember is that it's the people with $1,000 in their bank account that now have zero that are paying for this entire thing. And the people who are the billionaires are now only slightly billionaires. And so I would say that you'd be 100% right with that logic if there was enforcement, if there was accountability. For us to say that we don't need these types of agencies means that the people who did some of these frauds actually have to go to jail. There actually has to be a real enforcement on the other side of it that says, we have learned our lessons and these 500 people went to jail, and therefore the next time that this happens, people are less likely to fraud. We learned from the housing crash that one guy went to jail and he was just a patsy for this whole organization. So there wasn't a whole lot of incentive. Well, hey, the next boom that happens, there's not gonna be a whole lot of consequences. So that whole kind of libertarian ideal of let it all happen, it'll all figure itself out, has to have just as big of consequences on the other side of people who legitimately fraud, legitimately steal, legitimately pump and dump, and know that they are doing something with real consequences against people. Now, if that were the case, I'd be all for it. I'd be like, yeah, let's have the world work itself out as long as the people who do this stuff actually go to jail. But until that happens, you need to have some of the regulators keep some of this from going crazy, or else we'll have another 2008. We'll have another crypto winter. We'll have another, whatever the next tulip thing is, it will get bigger and bigger and bigger unless people start to literally go to jail and sit there, and that will dissuade the next group of shysters from starting the next big pump and dump. Does that make sense?
So I understand that we're low on time, so this works out, because I'd like to build on what you're saying. Is I think that the solution may come as a blend, because I think responsibility of self to find out the information, I think, is key. But I think that there's also room for bias for disclosure. I mean, there's bias for disclosure for nonprofits. How much of your dollars go towards administration? How much of it goes towards beneficiaries? In financial institutions, right? So I don't understand why there can't be a simple solution of just saying, here's 5 questions that you should answer before we publish news about you. Like, do you have a token? Are you trying to, market that token? Anyway, so.
How do you deal with liars, though? The people would say, of course not.
Right, but they're
anonymous. They have $1 million in a crypto wallet that nobody knows about.
there will always be bad actors, but I think what I'm not well articulating is that it's got to start somewhere. And if there's an opportunity to Main Street's not going to get this, because they're not going to have your level of understanding or diligence. So I think that it's not realistic to say, well, everybody's just got to learn for themselves, because my husband's not going to learn that, right? He's just going to read the news and go, well, that didn't work out. Anyway, so I was trying to actually build on a blend of meeting the roads that way.
To your point, we do have advertising occasionally on the site, but we actually make everyone apply to advertise with us. And we have questions on there like, are you running an ICO? Or do you have a token? Like, where's your business located? What year was your business created? It's actually a fairly long form that we
but
hope.
I think it should be actually published.
Yeah,
so that the reader has the provenance of the genesis of this information, motivation for it.
If you start publishing that information, like if that's part of your business strategy, then that will maybe encourage other companies to do the same thing. And I mean, yeah, you kind of have the Amazon effect of good customer service. Is that all the other companies are now having to do a lot better customer service because now they're competing with these guys. And so, that's yeah, that's their thing.
Right.
People like you are doing
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we try to do that with all of our coin listings. So for example, we have detailed information about over 3,000 cryptocurrency projects on CryptoSlate. And you can find information on there such as how much they raised in their ICO, who the founders are, see direct links to the founders' GitHub and LinkedIn profiles, find out where they're registered. All that information we're trying to organize and make it a streamlined way that people can get it. But as far as the advertisers, that's specifically what I meant. We also want to know the history of their business and where they're located and stuff like that.